Welcome to another insightful episode of The Shift with Elena Agar. Today, we're diving deep into the world of leadership development with our special guest, Aaron Trahan. We discuss the challenges leaders face in addressing their personal development and the importance of staying open to feedback and continuous improvement. Aaron shares three powerful strategies for combating complacency: out preparing, outworking, and outlearning. Together, we explore how leaders can set and maintain a standard of excellence, influence diverse teams, and manage themselves during tough times through transparency and openness. Also, Aaron emphasizes the importance of context, clarity, and accountability in achieving high performance in a workplace. So tune in, enjoy the conversation, and as always, like, share, subscribe, and let me know what you think. Aaron, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Hey, Elena, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
I'm really glad we got connected recently, and I've came across your profile, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my perfect guest because I'm all about growth and performance and how can we optimize ourselves in our leadership roles and organizations or just us as human beings, right?
Right.
So I'm really excited to get into all of that. But tell me a little bit more about how you got into this field. Like, what did you study? I'm always curious the connection between what do people study and then what they end up doing. It's always interesting to hear stories. So maybe you just kind of started diving into it. Tell me a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, what's interesting about that question is if you would have asked me 10 years ago that I would be doing full time what I'm doing today, I would have likely said 0% chance. No way that's happening. I'm more of a business operator, business builder. I like to lead and build businesses. I wouldn't be on this side of the table, but yeah, it's kind of interesting where a thread emerges and you pull on it and keep pulling, and you never know where it's going to take you. But for me, a lot of early in my career, I studied business and marketing in college, and I was fortunate enough to have worked my way into assuming leadership responsibilities in a leadership role within a corporate environment just a few short years into the workforce. And it was a high growth company which presented a lot of new opportunities. And over the next 7 to 8 years, I really scaled my way very quickly, kind of up the proverbial corporate ladder, so to speak, to the point where I became a senior executive leader of a $1 billion publicly traded organization by the time I was 30 years old. Um, Now, what happened at that point in time, it's kind of like the Marshall Goldsmith saying, and that's what got you here won't get you there. And when you have a lot of fast success at an early age, a lot of the times you're operating not even knowing the things that you don't know. And so, as I got to that senior executive level, I realized that I needed to still put in more work into my own development. What's if that was the highlight reel, what sits underneath it was I'm confident I made every mistake there possibly could have been made as an emerging leader. And that's where I got my first taste into professional coaching. I was avoiding a lot of development areas and weaknesses for a long time. And look, we don't come out of college knowing how to lead teams and lead organizations in complex environments. So I needed some help into becoming a more effective leader now that I was at this level. And so that was my that was my first approach into coaching, was me being on the client side, and it was actually becoming a more effective people leader was where I needed the most help. Um, and so once I kind of dove in and really committed to turning this weakness into a superpower and made it my mission to be a world class leader, that's what changed the direction of my entire career of then focusing more on people. How, as a leader, can I help others reach the next level? How could I be the springboard for others to get them from their version of good to their version of great? And it emerged into a passion for me. And so I had the opportunity a couple years ago to launch my own firm, and as they say, the rest is history.
Well, I love it. Was there any particular moment when you felt that you were ready to make that leap and kind of do your own thing? Was there a particular event that happened, a state of mind, anything that was magical that happened, or was it just like kind of came with it?
Yeah, I would say probably before I launched my own firm, I would say there was almost this intuitive gravitational pull that kept pulling me in that direction. And as I wanted to give the gift back that I received from coaching and having a strong advisor and mentor that changed everything for me, I then wanted to do that, with some of the people around me. And so over the years, I kind of started mentoring and unofficially coaching, former direct reports and team members and colleagues. And it got to the point where I was having some of these unofficial calls for up to 8 to 10 people a month. So it started to kind of occupy a pretty significant part of my time. And yes, there was one event that I can point to with one of my former direct reports at a prior company, who we were engaging in a pretty deep way. He asked the simple question of, why aren't you doing this on a full-time basis? Like,
Mm,
this is what you're great at. This is what you have a passion for. Like, why aren't you doing this full time? I
mhm,
gave some off the cuff answers like, this isn't what I do. I like to be in the business and build the business. And it was just a couple weeks later, I was kind of just waking up, knowing, remembering, and recalling that conversation. And I knew that answer that I gave to him was bullshit. I also felt what he felt, and I knew this is what I should be doing. And so that was what really started me working backwards to putting the right pieces in place for me to kind of go into business for myself and launch my own organization.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting because it's in a way you're still building the business, except you're doing it indirectly via other people and you're helping them be at their best so they can build their businesses. So it's, and I'm sure that I can only imagine how that experience has added to you working with business leaders and leaders in organizations and so on.
That's right.
You've mentioned something earlier around out of college, most people do not get trained in management, right? But furthermore, most managers, I think statistically, I don't know if that statistic's still true. It was a couple years ago that I saw it, but it was like a manager will spend 10 years in a managerial role where they're responsible for other team members before they actually get any management training. And so hence, the problem we have in corporations today. I can spend a whole hour just talking about the issues we have
Oh
with
yeah.
managers and the lack of investment that goes into that space. And so because it does take, it's a different game once you kind of, you said like, it's what got you there won't get you to that next level. So talk to me about going from, from that level up, or like from good to great, as a little bit more detail.
Yeah, it's you just touched on something that's so critically important. And for those that have ever been involved with any sales organization, I think we've all seen, organizations push a high performing salesperson too quickly into leading a sales organization. And it's almost like it's a completely different person. We just make the assumptions that their performance as an independent contributor is going to just translate directly without any training into leading an organization or a team. And yeah, I think it is a different skill set. And I think, leadership ultimately boils down to, a pretty awesome responsibility. And I think for those leaders that are making that transition from high performer, independent contributor to now responsible for leading a team and getting a team to operate from a high performance level, yeah, I can't encourage leaders enough to go in and get that coaching, get that training, really find out where are your gaps between where you're currently operating at and how to be the most effective leader that you can be. And yeah, I think a lot of that is feedback. It's asking the right questions. It's, I think a very simple question that's just flat out not asked enough is for more leaders to just ask the question looking ahead of, how can I improve? How can I
Mhm.
get better? Not looking backwards of saying, what could I have done differently in that situation, but how can I be a more effective leader going forward? And I think while that could be uncomfortable to ask, and some of the feedback could be a bit awkward or uncomfortable, And you may not agree with it all, but there's always going to be insights on the other side of that question that can help you understand in what areas and what actions you can take to be a better leader of a team versus being a very high performing independent contributor or member of a team.
Hmm. And to your point, I think it is very uncomfortable to ask that question, and I think it depends on industries and the level of transparency in an organization. The culture of organization really plays a role, and I think it's I'm curious to your point. I mean, about your opinion about the fact that, well, it's not a fact. Let me ask you this. Do you run into leaders where it's like, no matter how much development they may need, it's just never going to change for them? Like, you know what I mean? Like, at what point, like, is everybody, what's the word I'm looking for? Is everybody changeable or trainable in a particular way? Or like, how do you, without the self-awareness, right? Like, what are the, because I think that's what a lot of organizations struggle with. You have the leadership, especially depending on generational differences, and it's very hard to be vulnerable. And it's like, if you've been successful doing X, Y, and Z for so many years, you're not always really caring about external coaches or opening up. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. And here's something that I see almost every day, right? And once leaders reach a certain level of success, something interesting happens. They develop a tendency to now only listen to the things that they may want to hear while losing the willingness to continue listening to the things they most need to hear. That hard, uncomfortable feedback that can help them continuously improve and develop. And I kind of like the leaders that I work with, I kind of like to have them think about it in the form of complacency, right? And complacency is not something that just happens early on. It's not always just the thing that prevents people from reaching the next level of success. It's shifting the perspective around as you become more successful, you have to work harder at keeping complacency out because as you become more successful, it's easier to become more complacent. You've got the track record, you've got the achievements, you may have the status or the title or the salary, the money in the bank, whatever it is, it's easier to become more complacent as you become more successful. So I like to challenge leaders of how are you working harder today as successful as you are than you were a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And if you're working less hard at trying to push out complacency, it's only a matter of time before the awareness starts to suffer, blind spots start to form, and this trajectory that you were on of up and to the right starts to plateau a bit, and you're not on that same growth trajectory that you were because you're lacking awareness, lacking clarity, less open to feedback, listening to things you want to hear and you don't need to hear. So it's a pretty slippery slope as you start climbing that mountain of success to make sure you're keeping complacency out.
Hmm. In your experience working with different leaders, have you seen themes or trends among people that can do that well, versus those, like, maybe there's something else they do in their days or their routines that helps them keep that in check? Maybe it's an
Yeah.
ego thing as well, could be a part of it. Have you seen any trends?
Yeah. I'll share a couple that I kind of like to use with my leaders. That's almost kind of a forcing mechanism to help them against the battle of complacency. And the one thing that I've seen, so if you look at the leaders that allows complacency or allows success to kind of get them stuck into a comfort zone versus those leaders that continue to find new level after new level after new level, we kind of break it down in what I refer to as my 3 out performance formula. And when leaders do these 3 things consistently, I've yet to find an example or a scenario where that leader doesn't find new levels of success. And the first out is staying committed to just out preparing their former selves or everyone around them. I think What happens when you get more successful? You think you've got it all figured out. You think you've got it. You think you've arrived. You've got this whole thing. You know it like the back of your hand. That will always show up when you start thinking that way in your preparation. You're not reflecting. You're not doing the due diligence. You're not digging into the details. Blind spots form and will eventually impact your performance. And so, the best student usually always wins. And so the best students are the ones that prepare, do the homework, do the due diligence. So that's number one that I've seen with those leaders that continue to find new levels of success, is that they're master preparers. Their I's are always dotted, their T's are always crossed. And if they get something wrong, it's not going to be because of lack of preparation. Number two is they just simply outwork everyone else around them. And this is not some hustle culture thing on how many hours a week you can work. It's not them walking around with a badge on their sleeve showing I've worked 80 hours. This is more about leverage. This is more about productivity, right? We all only have 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, and 12 months in a year. So that no amount of money will ever change that. What does change is how much you're able to get done within those time increments. How can you find the leverage on your time, energy, and bandwidth to generate greater output without changing your inputs? And so this group just continues to find ways to outwork, outproduce, and outleverage everyone around them. And then third, and I would say this is probably the most important, is that they outlearn everyone around them. They don't let their title, they don't let their status, they don't let, their past achievements stop them from being the best student in the room. They stay in a learn it all mode and don't think of themselves as the know it all or the smartest person in the room. So they're willing to learn from people several layers below them. They're always trying to get to the right answer. They're always looking for new ideas. They're always looking for better ways and approaches. And so, yeah, I would say for a leader looking to make sure they continue on that growth path, out prepare, outwork, and outlearn everyone around you. I have yet to have anyone show me an example of someone who does those three things consistently and doesn't find more success.
Mm. And when it comes to teams, how can they then project that onto their teams or influence, what have you seen? And especially like now with all the different generations and different values that people have in a job. So we have, the Gen Zs I work with a lot of Gen Zs, and the requests I get are just, through the wall. And I was like, I wish I had the courage to ask for what they're asking for. I mean, it's like I feel like, like they don't work for the company, I work for them,
Right.
So it's but then you have all these different generations and everybody's motivated very differently. How can a leader then kind of cultivate that high performing team?
Yeah, I think it first starts with a standard, right? And so as a leader, one of your biggest responsibilities is for establishing what is the standard of excellence for this team? What is the culture going to be about? How are we going to go about doing things and getting things done? And without setting the standard, without being intentional, without being deliberate, how can you expect the team to always meet or exceed that standard of excellence? And then I think that also shows up as once that standard is set, the leader has to be what I kind of refer to as the torchbearer. They have to be the ones on a day in, day out basis, providing that shining example for their team of what operating above that standard of excellence looks like. They have to be the example. And I think so many of the cultural issues that I see is leaders may get up in a annual sales kickoff at the beginning of the year or the big, quarterly town hall meetings, and they say something one time and expect that just to be the way that things are going forward, right? And I like to remind leaders as much as I can, it's not about what you say behind a podium. It's not what shows up in an email signature. It's not what you paint on the walls inside your building. establishing the culture that you ultimately want comes down to three very important things. It's one that we already mentioned is you have to be the example of showing people on a day in, day out basis what the standard of excellence actually looks like. And then the other two are very critical. It comes down to what the leaders and leadership team tolerates and what you don't. That will always have a much greater outsized imprint on the behaviors that shape the culture more than anything else that you do. So if you're the one walking the walk, and then you're the one that's enforcing the standard by not tolerating the things that fall under that standard, and then driving kind of the behaviors and rewarding the things that do, I think those are going to be the things that you have to keep, and it's not static, right? You can't say you're going to do it in Q1 and then forget it for the rest of the year. This has to be mindful. This has to be a way at which you operate on a week in, week out basis, because this is culture is a fickle animal, right? It's hard to gain, but it's easy to lose. And so if you're not the torchbearer of being the example and then showing the team by your actions of what's tolerated and what's not, I think finding the culture that you ultimately want is going to be wildly elusive if you can't do those things.
Mm. It's interesting when you were talking, when you talk about culture and you say, it's not about what's on your walls and all that. And
Mhm.
I tend to agree because you have a lot of companies that have these beautiful values that are listed, right? And we stand for X, Y, and Z, but there's no behavior that is associated with that value.
Right.
There's no like, what does it look like in action? Like, wonderful, you're collaborative. Let's choose one. What does that actually like? How does one know if they're being collaborative? And worst, they then, rate performance as, well, you need to practice our values, but then it's like so many people in a company don't. So, I think I don't know where I heard this before, but it's like the best way to like influence somebody is to lead by example.
Yeah.
And it's tough to do, particularly in times of change, right?
Yeah.
Because we are emotional beings and so on. Any tips on how a leader can not only manage themselves, because no matter how great of a leader you are, there are going to be days where you lose your shit, and there are going to be days where you might not be at your best. Hope maybe not, maybe that's my assumption, but I just feel like as human beings there are going to be moments where we're not at that best, and we're not always going to lead by example. Your thoughts, and how do you manage that as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's there are absolutely going to be those times. And I think when a leader can be upfront, honest, and transparent, it's being able when a bad decision is made or when a
Mm,
bad event is done, it is so powerful for a leader to stand up and say, I screwed this up. Either here's what led to this decision that I flat out got wrong. Here's what I learned from it, and here's what we're going to be doing differently. Or simply saying, hey, I reacted a certain way that's not within the standard that I've set for myself and that I'm holding my team to. Here's what I'm going to be doing differently. Here's how I'm going to improve. And so yeah, I don't think our teams look at us as leaders to walk around as like flawless gods, right? I think we all have the space to learn, grow, and develop. But when the blind spots form, when you're making these mistakes, when you're operating in such a way that's below the standard of excellence that you say should exist, and then you don't acknowledge that, or worse, you're tolerating that from others on the team, I think that's the worst thing you can do. So I think it is staying disciplined to being the standard for yourself. Because if a leader can't commit and continue to operate and make progress towards, and we don't live in a world of guarantees.
mm,
So you can't expect yourself to be perfect or be great 100% of the time, but acknowledging when there is a slip up, acknowledging when there was a bad decision, bringing the team in, helping them understand what went into it, what did I get wrong, what did I learn, what will I do differently, I think is such a powerful leading by example moment that I think when you do have those mistakes, don't view those as a flaw or I really screwed this up. Think about it as an opportunity. And when
Mm.
you can be that humble and show the team what it looks like on how to bounce back, how to recalibrate, how to learn from it, I think that is taking a shortfall and turning it into an opportunity that enhances culture, that moves the team above that line of standard of excellence. So I think the famous saying goes is never waste a crisis as a good
Yeah.
opportunity or something along those lines. And I think there's some truth into that. It's like don't shy away from it. Don't ignore the mistakes. And yeah, be the example that you want to set for the team, even when things don't go well. I'd say most especially when things don't go well. But if you don't have that transparency and that openness, you sure as hell shouldn't be able to expect it from your team because they will follow the cues from the leader.
Mm. And I think it's particularly important, I would imagine, in those times of change, because that's when you need your team to trust you and to trust you to get through it. And if you're not able to be vulnerable and transparent, right? Like, and maybe to an extent, right? You don't need to put everything maybe on the table. It depends on, it depends on various factors, but I think owning up to when you make a mistake, that allows other people to also know that you're in it with them versus and sometimes we just don't know the process. Like somebody told me again a long time ago, and there's a process, and a process takes place. And so, and
Yeah.
I keep this in mind for everything, because it's like you cannot imagine what a role of a leader is if you've never been in that situation. Oh, you can imagine, but you don't really know the ins and outs, and there's certain information you just don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And so you left as an employee with your own imagination, and then usually in the times of change, that imagination is going negative, and that's when people start to
Right.
panic, and it's just like there's a lot of bad things that can happen because of lack of transparency and because of lack of vulnerability from the leader. And we've seen a lot of
Yeah.
that play out over the last several years as well.
Yeah. I think if you're a leader and you're trying to create a scenario that I mean, just take the opposite side of this conversation, right? We're talking about how to build culture, how to lead by example, but think about the opposite side. If you wanted to go out and design a scenario that breaks trust and
Mm.
just dilutes your culture, what would you do as a leader? You would hold people accountable to the very things that you're not holding yourself accountable to. You're trying to get the team to a standard that you yourself are not living up to. That is exactly how you destroy a culture and erode trust. So I think it's always important to look at the opposite ends of the spectrum of what would you do to get the exact opposite result that you're looking for. And leaders are blind to that in most cases, especially when there's a lot of change or they're in the heat of the battle. It takes them to zoom out and say, oh man, I'm doing the exact opposite to build trust and deliver a culture. And an equation that I like to because you said it perfectly, and it's all around openness and transparency. And I think that's the start. And so when I think about a high performance equation, all of us leaders are all trying to build high performance teams. And for me, I think about that in terms of context. Does the team know why we're pursuing, why we're chasing what we're chasing? Is there context behind whatever it is that we're showing to be success? Clarity. Do they have clarity on what success looks like? Can it be measured? Is it being tracked? Is it being monitored? So when you have context and you have clarity, then you can have accountability to that strong level of that standard of excellence, right? And so if you don't have context and don't have clarity, it's going to be damn tough to hold the team accountable because to your point, there's no transparency. What am I accountable to? I don't know what the goals are. I don't know what success looks like.
Mm.
And so that's what equates to high performance. Context plus clarity plus accountability will always equal high performance if you get those things right.
And then, people in leadership positions, it's very often it's lonely up top. And this is where sometimes having that external soundboard, a coach, some kind of support network really helps. So And I'm really excited to see that coaching has, picked up in terms of like leaders taking advantage of it, because there's so much uncertainty and so much change. And I think we're all starting to realize that we're human, and no matter what title you have or how much money you make, it's always helpful to have some kind of coach
Yeah.
around you. So talk to me a little bit about the impact of coaching, and, does everybody need a coach? When do we need one? Maybe we don't.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that everybody needs one. If your goal is to get better, right? If your goal is not to get better, there may be a good reason for that, but to be honest with yourself, right? And I like to think about coaching as the accelerator. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you from mistakes. It's going to accelerate the learning curve. It's going to broaden your perspective. Um, I heard an example recently that I thought was perfect, and you touched on this. Is our minds can go to some pretty weird places, right? Especially when we have the monkey mind, and um, you know, just by being able to kind of get those thoughts out into a support system that helps us connect dots and make sense of it. I heard someone refer to coaching recently where it's almost like it's our own thought disruptor, because
Mm,
our thoughts can lead us, and sometimes it can lead us away from where we want to go. Having that coaching system in place allows there to be a disruptive force to recalibrate how we think, how we believe, how we, then drive emotions and behavior from that. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be, if your goal is to get better and you want to accelerate the rate to getting to your destination as fast as possible, you simply will not be able to go as fast as someone in an exact same situation that's leveraging coaching. And the people that I talk to all the time is, look, writers have editors, therapists have therapists. Steve Jobs had a coach in the form of Bill Campbell. The co-founders of Google had a coach. Michael Jordan had a coach. Tiger Woods had a coach. If
mm,
the best of the best are tapping into this to enhance their performance, how in the hell are you ever going to catch up thinking that you don't need it? Is kind of
yeah.
how I like to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had coaches throughout my career, and if anything, I think that another really useful space for a coach is helping you create space to think about things you need to think about in a leadership role. So it's like one part of it is like that personal development and improvement and so on, but a part of it is also like, making sure you're making time to think about things you need to think about as you develop your teams. So there's also, because we're so busy, and I mean, there are a lot of leaders that are just very, very busy, and the excuse that I often hear is like, well, I didn't have time to think about X, Y, and Z about this employee or person or so on. So it creates that space and accountability. So yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Obviously, I'm biased towards coaching and so on.
Yeah, me too, just a little
But
bit.
yeah, there is something, I mean, like objectively, there is, to your point, the greatest of the greats have coaches, because we don't know what we don't know. And it's helpful to have a soundboard, and it's helpful to, when things come out of your mouth, sometimes you're like, that does not sound right. And that's why I appreciate conversations, because the more you hear other people talk, or the more you speak, you're like, did I just say that? Or this doesn't sound right. Or yeah, this is aligned, and so on. And if you have a professional like yourself who can then bounce back and question and challenge and push and so on a little bit on the thought process, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the golden mine, right?
Yeah, I think about things in terms of proactivity and reactivity, right? And so if
Mhm.
all of the lessons that you're going to learn are going to be on the back of your own mistakes, that learning curve is going to be very long and purely reactive, which means you're going to have to make the mistakes first to get the learning, the wisdom, and the experience on the other side. Um, where I think coaching completely shifts that dynamic is it allows you proactive acceleration. You can get insights and avoid the mistakes before they happen by
Mm,
leveraging the wisdom, experience, and systems that someone else has, where you can get the lessons by avoiding the scars. And I kind of point to tennis in a lot of cases, because in tennis, there's an actual stat of unforced errors, right? And you look at all the greats, and they are really strong with the fundamentals that if they get beat, it's going to be because someone else beat them, not because they beat themselves through unforced errors. And so I think
Mm,
about coaching as your way to avoid making the mistakes that are avoidable. And, it's not saying that coaching is going to allow you to operate perfectly. Mistakes are going to happen. But when you can minimize the mistakes, kind of think about that in terms of unforced errors and speed. The more that you reduce the unforced errors, the faster you can accelerate and learn and grow at a faster and faster pace. The more unforced errors you're making, the slower your growth trajectory is going to be. And so if coaching can offer that, for those that think it's too expensive, I don't have the budget, think about it from an opportunity cost standpoint. How much is it costing you not to get coaching? And back to that finite resource that we all have, if you can get to where you want to go years faster than you otherwise would, put a dollar amount on that. How much is that worth?
mm,
And so, yeah, I like to tell people is like, do not think about coaching as an expense,
mhm.
but think about coaching as an investment, because those are two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned it because this morning a friend of mine who's a personal trainer,
Hmm.
posted something on Instagram. And it was on average, people spend between $400 to $800 a month on liquor and going out to eat and brunches and so on that adds zero value, maybe a little bit of joy, sure,
Yep,
for a period of time, but it's like, it just comes down to priorities and you look at it as an investment.
that's right.
I don't think, I think a lot of people, um, can afford it. I think it just comes down to the mindset around coaching and so on. And yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely an
It's
investment.
it's it's priorities, right? And so
Yes.
when someone tells me they have the desire, they're ready to take action, they're committed to growing, but just can't afford coaching, I tell them it's like, then it's not a priority.
Yeah.
Because if it was a priority, you will always be able to find ways to make it happen and invest in the areas that you're most focused on. And yeah, you show me your calendar and how you spend your time. I'll show you what your priorities are, regardless of what you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, even if people who can't afford coaching, there are also so many other resources that one can use and so on if they really wanted to, make that change. But again, I think for at least for my audience, I think it just comes down to like priorities and investing in yourself. So
And just like any
yeah.
and just like any other market, there's a coach at every price level, right? And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
coaches just starting out can be very, very affordable. And sometimes they may even be willing to do it for free in exchange for a testimonial. And so
Yeah.
kind of goes back, if it's your priority to get better and you want to invest in yourself through coaching, you will always be able to find a solution if it's a priority. But using it as an excuse or an escape valve, it's just a reflection of your priorities, nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah. Absolutely. Before I ask you my last question, where can
Yeah.
people find you and get in touch with you? Where do you hang out at the most virtually?
Yeah, the two places. First is LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is such a value add platform. I'm very active on there, so I would highly encourage your audience. Let's connect. Let's message. I'm trying to deliver value through that community almost on a daily basis. And then second would be my website. That's performancemindsetcoaching.co. That's where you can really hear directly from my clients on the results they've had. You can understand more about my methodology, the approach to putting the how to the what of helping leaders get better. So those are the two spaces you'll find me at the most.
And I'll make sure to share that in the show notes. And the final question I ask all of my guests is, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Oh, that's a good one. And the one that's jumping out top of mind kind of goes back to the one that we already talked about earlier. I just I just think the most simplest question that can unlock the most insights is often so underutilized. And it's simply by asking, how can I improve?
Mm.
How can I get better? And I think when you can make it a habit, I've got a couple clients, we've actually set a quota for them that you need to ask 3 people a week this question. And look, you may not get a ton of insights from it. You may think the person's off base, but when you start collecting those responses, there's gold and wisdom in there. And you're giving yourself your very own blueprint on how to improve and how to get better. And so, the biggest question I think that we should all be asking is, how can I improve? And it also is the single best defense to play against that other topic we talked about earlier, complacency. You show me someone who's complacent, I'm going to show you someone more likely than not that's not very active with asking people and or themselves, how can I improve? So if you're looking to implement continuous improvement mechanisms in your life, that's the single biggest question I think you should be asking more people. And that's, how can I improve?
Mm. That's such a great reminder for myself. I used to do that, and it's been a while. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask a few people this week. So thank you for that.
Love that.
I think it's powerful. I think it is a real. I've always had, like, and it's not always pleasant. Sometimes you're like,
Mhm.
my little ego is hurt. But it's healthy. It's healthy.
But think of it as a flashlight, right? And
Yes,
that's a
yes.
flashlight that will always be able to be shine on your blind spots. And I I use this in my presentations, but blind spots to a leader are like cigarettes to the body. They will
Mm.
slowly kill you, right? And I think the single biggest question you can ask to avoid blind spots from forming is simply by asking, how can I improve? There's
Mm.
always wisdom on the other side of that question.
Absolutely. It's golden. I love that question. Well, thank you so much, Aaron, for your time and sharing your thoughts and strategies with us. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. Great discussion.